Tennessee football, with the transfer of Nico Iamaleava and the addition of Joey Aguilar, saved about $1.2 million in NIL funds. Iamaleava was making about $2.4 million a year. Aguilar's making about $1.2 million a year. They saved about 2.8 from what they could have ended up, 2.8 million from what they could have ended up paying if they had acquiesced to Iamaleava's demands. However, some people believe Joey Aguilar is a better fit for this system and are more excited about it. We know back in 2021, Josh Heupel was all in on Joe Milton with his arm strength, and it turned out Hendon Hooker was a significantly better fit for Heupel's system. Taking those two things into account, and taking into account the fact that with saving that NIL money, Tennessee was able to lure a couple of key transfers from the spring portal, most notably Colorado transfer cornerback Colton Hood, which should really help them offset the injury to Jamal McCoy that I just don't believe will have him fully healthy at the beginning of this year. Should Tennessee spend even less money than they're spending on Joey Aguilar? Should the Vols spend hardly any money on luring a good quarterback and just beef up their talent elsewhere because Josh Heupel's system can make any quarterback look good? That is today's tough question, and it's brought to you by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney. Play to win, why settle? Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones, banksandjones.com. And that's the poll question, guys. The poll question is up. We're going to dive into it later. But should the Vols spend less money on quarterbacks and more on talent elsewhere? And the options are yes, Heupel makes any quarterback look good. No, Heupel's offense depends on quarterbacks. I'm going to give you the poll results later, but I'm going to go ahead and give you my answer right now. Yeah, they should spend less on quarterbacks. They should spend less on quarterbacks. They should focus less on quarterbacks and make sure that they have talent elsewhere. For a couple of reasons. One, Josh Heupel misevaluates talent at quarterback. He falls in love with the big arm. The big arm is the most overrated part of the quarterback in Heupel's system. They have to be able to throw the deep ball. They have to have an accurate deep ball. But it's just got to be able to be within the vicinity. It's more about they got to be quick decision makers and they got to be able to get rid of the ball and willing to throw it up for receivers to make plays. This offense is very easy to read and gives quarterbacks very easy chances to find open men and throw to a spot. Brian Callahan actually talked about this a couple of days ago with the Titans, funny enough, and said that the difference between college and the NFL is you have to throw to a spot before you see the receiver break to get there. That's not necessarily that's in the NFL. That's not necessarily the case in college. And he specifically talked about Tennessee, where you already kind of know where you're going before you snap the ball when you're at Tennessee, because of the fact that the offense and the spreading the field with the white hash marks allows you to read the defense so easily. It's more important to have the receivers that can actually beat the guys off the break than it is to have the quarterback. We saw this last year. I think Nico Iamaleava's biggest problem for not putting up a ton of stats was, yes, there was the shell 4-2-5 defense that teams were running. And that was certainly a factor, and I'm not here to dismiss that. But there was also the fact, and yes, there were also injuries at tackle. I'll add that too. But there was also the fact that Nico Iamaleava was dealing with injured tackles, and also that the receivers, and I want to be specific on this, the wide receivers specifically had lost a step. Because Brew McCoy, as I've talked to you guys about, was coming off an injury, and then he wasn't dictating coverage the way he needed to. With that in mind, I think Tennessee needs to make sure that they're better elsewhere, and quarterbacks don't matter in Heupel's system. Heupel turned Drew Lock into an NFL draft pick. He ain't that good, guys. He went undefeated with McKenzie Milton. He did have Dylan Gabriel, and then he went to Tennessee and had Hendon Hooker. And for those who don't know, Hendon Hooker still hasn't started yet in the NFL. So you look at that. Heupel, I believe, and this is a big thing for me, Heupel, I believe, has a system that can make any quarterback look good if the other pieces are around him. So I would spend less on quarterbacks and more on receivers and more on making sure my defense was as good as possible, because that's the other part of this is you got to make sure, Heupel's an offensive-minded guy. You got to load up on talent on defense. With the NIL money, load up on the talent on the defensive side of the ball. Have the big advantage there The quarterback, when you don't, I would honestly just take walk-ons at quarterback or find somebody from the Division II level. I'm not kidding, guys. I would find Division II or junior college quarterbacks. This would reset the market for college football. It would be the Moneyball approach that no other school is taking, and Tennessee could dominate because I think Heupel can make any quarterback work with the talent around him. Today's tough question, again, brought to you by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney. Play to win. Why settle? Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones, banksandjones.com. Vote on the poll question. Should the Vols spend less money on quarterbacks and more on talent elsewhere? Yes, Heupel makes any quarterback look good. No, Heupel's offense depends on the quarterback. We'll give you the results of that poll question. First, a quick message from Banks & Jones.
Why Banks & Jones? Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks & Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. They'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? It's Banks & Jones. T. Scott.
Should Tennessee spend less money on quarterbacks and more on talent elsewhere? The poll question is up. 65% say yes, Josh Heupel makes any quarterback look good. 35% say no, Josh Heupel's offense depends on the quarterback. I'm with the 65%. Josh Heupel makes any quarterback look good. I'm also with, what does it say about Josh Heupel and his ability to evaluate talent and his intelligence that he doesn't realize that he's such a good coach, he makes any quarterback look good, and so he doesn't need the Joe Miltons of the world or even the Nico Iamaleavas of the world. He needs the elite wide receivers that can make plays. David Speaks comes in and says, look at Will Howard. He was considered a less talented quarterback than Kyle McCord, but under day he won the Natty. You're absolutely right, David Speaks. That is the absolute truth. They took less money for for Will Howard, and they loaded up on receivers, and those receivers gave Tennessee hell in the college football playoff. You can go to Tennessee themselves. When Tennessee won the national title in 98, it's after they lost Peyton Manning. Why? They upgraded at so many other positions. Now, there was no NIL at the time, but that proved that if you have a good enough quarterback, if you have more talent elsewhere, you can go win. And it's more important now with the age of NIL. I actually think if you run a pro-style offense, it's a little more important to have an elite quarterback. But I think an offense like Josh Heupel's system doesn't need a dominant quarterback to make all the plays. I think in general, you just need to make sure you have a serviceable quarterback, and you need to load up on talent everywhere else. And then you could absolutely dominate anybody. Now, obviously, this year will prove that more than ever if it's the case, because Joey Aguilar is coming from Appalachian State. He has some physical limitations talent-wise, so we're going to find this out if it's the truth. But at the same time, I don't think there's any way you could look at what Josh Heupel's done with other quarterbacks and think, well, when quarterbacks struggle, there's no way you can look at Josh Heupel and say it depends on how good the quarterback is. Now, a fit matters, but like even Joe Milton in 2023, there was talk about him struggling. I think a lot of that was the 3-3-5 shell that Heupel hadn't adjusted to, and Brew McCoy breaking his leg. Let's not forget this, guys. I'm going to say this up front. Tennessee beats Florida in 2023 if Cooper Mays isn't hurt. They do. It spiraled. It was in the swamp. We're criticizing how Joe Milton played that whole year, but they still beat Florida in the swamp if Cooper Mays isn't hurt that game. That's their first loss. Their next loss is to Alabama. I think they lose to Alabama no matter what, but Brew McCoy did have a broken leg after the Alabama game. He did get hurt against Alabama. Their third loss was to Missouri, and they got blown out, but Missouri threw that 3-3-5 shell that Tennessee wasn't prepared for. Would have been a huge difference with a healthy Brew McCoy to dictate coverage, and Dante Thornton got hurt in the first half of that game. Even though it was 36-7, believe it or not, if you have those two guys healthy, if you looked at the way Tennessee moved the ball and you take away a couple of turnovers, that's a much closer game. And I think there's a really good chance Tennessee can win that game if Brew McCoy is 100% healthy. So there's a very good chance that in 2023, with all of Joe Milton's struggles, Josh Heupel's offense still has him and Tennessee hosting Georgia with only one loss late in the year and a chance to go to Atlanta for the SEC championship game. So I put that on. Yeah, I think Josh Heupel's system is it's more important to have the talent elsewhere than it is to have the perfect quarterback with the big arm. I just think the quarterback with the big arm is really, really, really unimportant. And with that in mind, I got to be honest. I think Josh Heupel is making a mistake, ever going that all out for quarterbacks. And that now George McIntyre is one thing because you get him at a discount. Jake Merklinger was a 4-star, so it wasn't like he was commanding a ton of money, I don't believe. But even if Faison Brandon, is it really worth it? I mean, I got to be honest, I'm not so sure. The poll question up again, should the Vols spend less money on quarterbacks and more on talent elsewhere? 60% now saying yes, Heupel makes any quarterback look good. 40% saying no, Heupel's offense depends on the quarterback.